Good morning, everyone. Thank you for that kind introduction. It's a pleasure to be with you here today in Wiesbaden for the BKA's annual conference, particularly this one given its focus on cybercrime, threat, intervention, and defense. I'd like to thank and congratulate our German hosts for putting on such an excellent event. As was said, my name is Michael Daniel, and I currently serve as Special Assistant to the President and Cybersecurity Coordinator at the White House. In my role, I lead the United States government's development of its national cybersecurity strategy and policy, and I oversee the implementation of those policies on behalf of the President. One of the really great parts of this job is getting to engage and listen to a diverse range of representatives from across governments, the private sector, academia, both at home and, like this, abroad. I've been particularly looking forward to this conference because it gave me a reason to have my first trip to Europe in my capacity as cybersecurity coordinator, so I'm very appreciative of that. Today, I would like to provide an overview of some of the U.S. government's current thinking on cybersecurity, including our priorities, areas of potential challenges and opportunities, and how the United States and Germany can work together to improve our collective security in cyberspace. But first, I'd like to talk briefly about the challenges we face. As all of you know, and as President Zerka just laid out, the problem is quite significant for both governments and businesses alike. From our perspective, I would like to point out three trends that we think make the cyber threat particularly troubling. First, the threat is becoming broader and more diverse. As we hook more and more items up to the internet, the potential vectors for attack are growing exponentially, making the surface we need to defend ever bigger. And we are continually connecting new and different kinds of things to the internet. Think cars to coffee makers, to distributed sensors. So the problem of defense becomes even more challenging than it was when we were just simply protecting wired desktops. Second, the threat is becoming more sophisticated. Malware is getting harder and harder to detect, and it does more varied kinds of things. And at the same time, you no longer have to be a coder in order to develop and use malware. Not only are the malicious actors making malware easier to use, in some cases, cyber criminals have established online help desks so that if your malware doesn't work, you can call and get help. Third, the threat is becoming more dangerous. Malicious actors are showing an increasing willingness to actually be destructive in their activities and move up the threat ladder from just doing web defacements or even denial of service attacks. And we've seen this destructive trend in things like the attack against Saudi Aramco, the oil company in Saudi Arabia last year, and the South Korean banks earlier this year. What is very concerning to us is how normal these threats are becoming. Now, right now, the new normal is not massive power outages across an entire country or trains grinding to a halt nationwide. Those kinds of things aren't normal, at least not yet. Rather, these trends are leading to a new normal that is less flashy than a Hollywood movie, but still troubling. Persistent intrusions, violations of privacy, theft of business information, and degradation and denial of service to legitimate entities trying to do business or get their message out on the internet. Now, as we think about how we manage these threats, we have to keep in mind one unique characteristic of cyberspace. Traditionally, there's an argument that goes along the lines that cyberspace has no borders, and that's both a strength, the free flow of information that drives huge economic benefits, and a problem, because it allows malicious actors great freedom of movement. But I would argue that line of argumentation is not complete. Information does flow quite freely, and the malicious actors do have great freedom of movement. But there are borders and boundaries everywhere in cyberspace. Now, they don't reflect the political boundaries or the physical boundaries of the real world, but there are boundaries and borders everywhere. Everywhere there's a firewall or a connection point, there's a border. Instead, what cyberspace lacks is an interior. There is no inside to our network spaces. Effectively, everyone lives right at the border. And we are all connected through cyberspace, and that interconnectedness means that everything and everyone touches an edge or a border in some fashion, almost all of the time. And this reality has some profound implications for how we organize ourselves as a society to protect ourselves in cyberspace, and how I try to carry out my cybersecurity role. For example, in the physical world, we typically assign the mission of border security to a national government. But if everyone and everything lives right at the border in cyberspace, then it's not physically possible to assign the border security mission to just one group or element of our society, even a national government. It becomes a shared mission, one that everyone in a country or a society has a role in. And that means that the conventional ways of thinking about the threats need to change as well. For example, in many countries, citizens expect national governments to deal with external threats, while local governments tackle more limited internal threats like crime. But as we have seen, states often now take malicious action through locally based servers, and petty criminals are stealing money from around the planet. We can no longer simply use terms like external and internal as the basis for allocating responsibility. So, how do we improve our collective security in this new normal of daily intrusions against individuals, businesses, and governments? If you were hoping that I would now supply all of the answers to these questions, I'm afraid I'm going to have to disappoint you. I don't have the complete answers to these questions yet, and I don't think anyone does. However, I would like to highlight some of the principles we are following in the United States as we work to address this challenge. First, compromises are inevitable. Plan for them. In living with this new normal, we cannot be surprised when intrusions and outages occur. Instead, we must be prepared. Businesses and governments alike should develop and test their cybersecurity response plans, use modern network defense practices and technology, and continuously monitor their networks under the assumption that they have already been breached. And everyone should have contingency and fallback plans in place for when all of those previous techniques and strategies fail. Second, information must be shared frequently and rapidly. Cybersecurity is a shared challenge, and the international community has a shared responsibility in working together to address it. To do so, we all must be willing and able to share information about the respective threats we face. This requires collaboration at all levels, between governments, between government and industry, and between companies in the private sector. After all, the threats that we face today may be the threats that you face tomorrow or in 10 minutes. Teamwork is a requirement. In speeches back home, I often say, cybersecurity is a team sport. What I mean by that is that no single entity in our country can address this country alone. Everyone from the private sector to law enforcement to Homeland Security to civil society to our national security agencies have a role to play. And this is true in the United States, and I believe it to be true internationally. If we are only as strong as the weakest link in our interconnected networks, we each share responsibility for the safety and security of one another. Fourth, network defense and law enforcement first. The risk of misattribution, miscalculation, and escalation in cyberspace is very real. As a government, we should consider all of our cybersecurity and network defense activities against their possible foreign policy implications and our desire to establish international norms of acceptable behavior in cyberspace. We don't want our response to a minor cyber incident to harm our relationships with other nations, result in a physical conflict. As a result, we will undertake network defense and law enforcement activities first and work hard to make these solutions effective before using other means of dealing with malicious activity. And finally, protect privacy and civil liberties. The United States firmly believes cybersecurity and privacy are mutually reinforcing, not in competition. Done properly, cybersecurity protects privacy and civil liberties by strengthening the networks and systems that contain personal information. And we are taking steps to make that vision a reality. We are building protection for personal data into our cybersecurity framework for our critical infrastructure. We're ensuring that our network defense actions reflect our commitment to protecting the privacy and civil liberties of the users of those networks. And we're engaging with privacy advocates and other key stakeholders in discussions on how to safeguard privacy and civil liberties while supporting business, law enforcement, and enhancing our security. We also insist on strong privacy protections in any cybersecurity legislation that our Congress considers. All of our partners, both in the United States and internationally, must have confidence in our ability to protect the information you choose to share with us. We are putting these principles into practice across all of our cybersecurity efforts, both domestically and internationally. First, we are working to strengthen the cybersecurity standards and practices in our critical infrastructure sector. As a key step in this effort, earlier this year, President Obama signed an executive order directing several actions aimed at exactly this goal. In particular, the executive order strengthens the U.S. government's partnership with critical infrastructure owners and operators to address cyber threats through information sharing, the protection of privacy and civil liberties, and the development of a framework of cybersecurity best practices and standards. We believe that governments have a clear role in helping private sector companies help themselves, especially when it comes to critical infrastructure owners and operators. To that end, the executive order requires the U.S. government to increase its efforts to share actionable information with those who need it most: network defenders, companies, and other governments. We have already started this effort, and we want to do more of it. For example, we have shared hundreds of thousands of signatures and indicators of malicious activity with the private sector and over 100 nations in just the past 6 months. It also incorporates strong privacy protections by mandating that federal agencies follow the Fair Information Practice Principles, or FIPS, when they implement their cybersecurity actions. But we recognize that information sharing alone would never be enough. We also needed to raise the bar for cybersecurity in the United States, again, particularly in our critical infrastructure. So the executive order directed the creation of a framework of cybersecurity best practices and standards for critical infrastructure. Over the last 9 months, the U.S. government has collaborated with the private sector to develop this framework. Now, let me be clear about this. The framework is not a scientific breakthrough in cybersecurity, and we recognize that fact. It is actually more basic. It outlines the best practices that many firms already do. However, what the framework does, is it provides a structured way for companies to think about their cybersecurity risk. And it gives them a way to determine what their current level of cybersecurity is, and then decide what they would like their level of cybersecurity to be. And then the framework provides a path or a way for them to get from where they are to where they would like to be. It points to standards and practices that, if implemented, will enable companies to achieve their desired level of cybersecurity. We recently completed the preliminary draft of this framework. We think it is an excellent start, but we know it can and will be improved upon in the future. As part of the process for finalizing the preliminary draft, we have asked for companies, industry sectors, in fact, almost everyone, that could possibly implement the framework to provide us with feedback on what works and what does not. And that request extends internationally as well. We welcome feedback from any government or any multinational company that chooses to provide it. As I have said, the United States does not have all the answers in this space, but by working with our international partners, we know that we can achieve more than we ever could individually. Second, norms development. We are working to integrate cybersecurity as a core element of our foreign policy relationships. Since cybersecurity is a shared responsibility, it's obviously not just a domestic issue. In cyberspace, states have a special responsibility to protect their national security and promote peace and stability with other nations. Consequently, we continue to engage with our allies and partners worldwide to solidify norms of cyber behavior. That is, what the actions are that states and other actors should and should not do in cyberspace, with a particular emphasis to ensure that the internet remains an open, interoperable, secure, reliable, and stable environment, following the principles outlined in the United States International Strategy for Cyberspace. In doing so, we are striving to create an environment in which everyone can benefit from cyberspace, in which cooperation is encouraged, and in which there is little incentive for states to disrupt or attack one another. But the truth is that actions speak louder than words. So to promote the norms that we want, we must take the steps to make them a reality. We need to move to an environment where all countries routinely and quickly respond to requests for assistance in mitigating cybercrime and other malicious activities emanating from their territory. The United States is committed to working with the international community to build the processes and capacity needed to respond to malicious activity through such collective action. Third, the United States remains steadfast in our support for an internet governance model that supports international trade and commerce, strengthens international security, and fosters free expression and innovation. We strongly believe that proposals advocating international regulation to curb the open and free nature of the internet would slow the pace of innovation and economic development, and it could lead to unprecedented control over what people say and do online. Such proposals, in fact, play directly into the hands of repressive regimes that wish to legitimize inappropriate state control over content. Instead, we believe that governments, the private sector, and civil society all should have an important voice on the future of the internet. If we truly believe that the path to economic growth and prosperity is through an open, interconnected world, we must strengthen, not weaken, the multi-stakeholder institutions that are critical to the management and administration of the internet itself. Fourth, we believe that we must increase our ability to disrupt malicious activities in cyberspace. And in order to achieve this goal, we must deepen our law enforcement cooperation across the international community, but particularly with Germany and our other European allies. The United States and Europe have had several successes in recent years. We established an EU-US working group on cybersecurity and cybercrime to identify common goals and actions to achieve those goals. We have had success in getting more countries to ratify the Council of Europe Convention on Cybercrime, usually called the Budapest Convention, and make it a truly global instrument for combating cybercrime. And last year, the United States and the EU launched the Global Alliance Against Child Sexual Abuse Online. All of these are notable achievements. But as technology continues to evolve, our legal responses must evolve with it. Issues such as data protection, law enforcement, access to data across international boundaries and borders, or information sharing between the public and the private sector all create new challenges for our law enforcement cooperation. We can and must ensure that our cooperation meets those challenges in order to address the ever-evolving threat from cybercriminals and non-state actors. While I've talked at length about the United States cybersecurity efforts, we are mindful that many countries are still working to develop the industries, technologies, and connectivity necessary for economic development in the 21st century. To bridge that gap, we are committed to connecting more people around the world to the digital future. The United States believes that expanded global access to telecommunications and broadband services, combined with an inclusive, multi-stakeholder-driven internet governance model, remains the best path towards economic growth that benefits everyone. And finally, we are committed to assisting developing nations around the globe to build their cybersecurity capacity. Across the United States, we have established programs to help governments create cybersecurity policies and programs from the ground up. These programs help address any number of needs, such as developing the rule of law in cyberspace, drafting national cybersecurity strategies, and creating computer emergency response teams. As just one example, the United States State Department has spent significant time and effort working with Senegal and Ghana to build long-term cybersecurity partnerships between the United States and 14 states in West and Central Africa. We are only one country, however, and we do not have unlimited resources. Therefore, we are eager and willing to work with other nations on awareness raising, legal and technical training, and other initiatives that will bolster our collective pursuit of an open, interoperable, secure, and reliable cyberspace. I would be remiss in giving this speech if I did not emphasize how much the United States values our cybersecurity partnership with Europe, and Germany in particular. You have been and will continue to be a key ally in building a more safe and secure cyberspace. As I mentioned above, on cybercrime, our law enforcement agencies have a long-standing and deep cooperative relationship and continue to work together on investigations and prosecutions. And I expect that that level of cooperation and support will continue far into the future. On incident response, our computer emergency response teams work together regularly to share threat information and address malicious cyber activity. In particular, we were deeply grateful for the time and immediate assistance that the German government provided earlier this year when we asked for help in dealing with an ongoing series of denial-of-service attacks against our banks and financial sectors. On foreign policy, our diplomats continue to be the staunchest of allies for our like-minded views on the applicability of international law to cyberspace and the norms of behavior for states in cyberspace. We are very committed to this partnership. While the United States and Germany at times differ in our opinion about the best way to build a more safe and secure cyberspace, we do agree on the importance of this mission. We cannot and must not lose sight of the fact that our cooperation and continued dialogue serves to strengthen and secure cyberspace for all of our citizens. I'd like to conclude with a few final thoughts. First, while we must continue to be mindful of the threats we face, we must all improve our collective cybersecurity capability through collaboration and partnership. Second, solving our cybersecurity challenges will not be easy. It will require persistence from all of us. But as President Obama said in his State of the Union address earlier this year, we cannot look back years from now and wonder why we did nothing in the face of real threats to our security, our economy, and to our way of life. Finally, the information age has only just begun. While the issues we face are complex and challenging, we have an opportunity now to put the foundation in place for a safer and more secure future. I, for one, look forward to that challenge. Again, I'd like to thank our hosts of this conference for putting on such a wonderful event and giving me this opportunity to speak. I really appreciate this opportunity to speak to all of you and look forward to our continued work to meet these challenges. Thank you very much.